I beat Anthony in a game of table tennis this week, so I get to go first. And it only took me 3 tries. Someone asked me this year, as I was getting ready to start my position as Minister for Lifelong Learning and Growth, why is UU religious exploration important to you? My answer is very simple. I would not be who I am without having experienced a UURE program. A serious commitment to systemically improving the lives of others and a sense of playful levity are both essential to who I am. I cannot live without both saving and savoring the world, as you put it in a sermon last year. Those are really hard truths to persistently and simultaneously hang on to. Our UU congregations are the only places I've found in my life to consistently honor both aspects of who I am. Without having the experience of children's and youth RE in a UU congregation from 1992 to 2003, I don't know where I would have identified these 2 strands of who I am, crucially. So when I contemplate the opportunity to create religious exploration programs for our children and youth, this is a profound and meaningful responsibility for me. We are working to create a place where they can become who they are, and it having meant so much to me is something I cannot not pass along. Even when it means change, when it means risk, when it means hard work, when it means the emotional discomfort that goes along with all of these things, I know this is a priority that our congregation shares. One of the great privileges for me this year in the associate minister role has been seeing the spark in your eyes, Anthony, when we've discussed the opportunities for improving UUCA's lifespan religious exploration. I'm curious kind of where that spark comes from for you and what in your life has made it feel like religious exploration is an important thing.
And that was a spontaneous question. We've not planned any of this. So just in case you're wondering, yeah, so. When I was 6 years old, my favorite books in all the world were part of a series called How and Why. I still have some of those books. The Wonder Book of Dinosaurs, The Wonder Book of Stars, The Wonder Book of Weather. All were things that aroused curiosity in me because they were at once obscure and fascinating. They were mysteries. The Wonder Book of Seashells, the Wonder Book of Insects, the Wonder Book of Rockets and Missiles. And I confess I was too impatient to actually read the words, or at least very many of the words in those How and Why books. I wanted to drink that knowledge in, which in my case amounted to looking at the pictures a lot, looking at those pictures, drinking those in. That picture of Triceratops and his 3 enormous horns together with the bony shield protecting his head and neck and shoulders. Or a picture of the earth, and it's positioned in front of the burning yellow sun so as to illustrate their comparative sizes. The earth flea-sized and the sun impossibly giant. I felt alive when I was reading those How and Why wonder books, and that's what I'm really trying to say, that sort of exploration filled me up with life. It fired my imagination, and that's where the spark in my eye comes from when I think about religious exploration and what is possible through it for all ages, for everybody. And I'm also inspired when I hear stories like yours, Jonathan, when I hear stories like yours. Our backgrounds are definitely different. They're different. In the religious community that I grew up in, I was taught that God loved me, and also God was just looking for an excuse to throw my soul into hellfire. That's what I experienced. And strangely enough, in this way, the church of my youth simply recreated my home life, where my mother, who happened to have borderline personality disorder, she loved me and she hated me, and it happened with maddening unpredictability, and I could never know when it would be heaven at home and when it would be hell, and it was hellish a lot of the time. So I do wonder what it would have been like to be 6 or 7 or 8 and grow up in a church community that was not a love-hate place, but it was just all love. What would that have been like? To grow up learning that religion and how and why wonder books, science, go together, just like peanut butter and jelly. What that would have been like. So you bet I have that spark in my eye. This is great. But now, tell me a little bit about your philosophy of children's religious exploration.
Yeah, I'm glad that we feel like this is important work to be doing together. And how do we do it? How do we do it well? My philosophy is that from the earliest times they are able to understand. We teach our children the values of sharing, acceptance, love, creativity, and compassion. We do it in age-appropriate ways because we know we have to meet folks where they are. I have always felt like I was loved to a degree that sometimes feels bizarre, I think, to those around me. A big part of the reason for it to feel natural for me, I think, to feel loved, is that from an early elementary age, I was part of a congregational community where I was persistently encouraged and affirmed. And I was corrected a lot, too, because that was definitely necessary. It turns out that even if it's a Nerf football, you're not supposed to practice throwing a fade route to your brother in the social hall during coffee hour. I always knew, though, that I was loved and that I could go there to be with friends of all ages. We want this place to be a congregation where children and youth make friends, but not only friends. It ought to be also someplace where they grow and lead. I believe that the meaning of being human is to participate in the dialectical process of God getting to know God's self. And there is no other time in our lives that embodies this holy, burgeoning self-awareness than adolescence. I think that is the most sacred time in our lives, and that we ought to be finding as many ways as possible for teenagers to be included in the life and the work and the leadership of this congregation. And it's not like this process ever ends. In adulthood, we are very much in the process of becoming. Often, it is when things change or break down suddenly that we are most open to the process of becoming. That is why we have linked lifespan RE and pastoral care programs under the responsibility of one minister in the role that I now have. That is going to be a place from which we can grow as a congregation. So this is my philosophy of how we do this important work. And I'm also curious to hear, Anthony, what is your philosophy of how we do this well?
So there's this old Hasidic story that goes like this. A disciple one day asked his rabbi, "Why does Torah tell us to place these words upon your heart? Why does it not tell us to place these holy words in your heart?" See the difference? Why not? And the rabbi answers, it is because as we are, our hearts are closed, and we cannot place the holy words in our hearts. So we place them on top of our hearts, and there they stay until one day the heart breaks, and those words, they fall right in. Yes, when life changes or when things break down, we are opened up to the next phase of our becoming, and this is for sure a part of my religious exploration philosophy too. And another part of it has to do with a conviction that I have long carried, the conviction that there is a natural part, or rather natural hunger, in the human psyche for experiences of deep connection and meaning. Our brains, they are hardwired to seek out intimacy and to seek out ultimacy. They are hardwired for that. William Ellery Channing spoke of our likeness to God. Ralph Waldo Emerson, he borrowed from the Quakers when he repeatedly invoked the image of the inner light. And that's what they're talking about, this big spiritual hunger that is hardwired in us. And single experiences of satisfaction are never enough. If you are physically hungry to the point of feeling hangry, if you are physically hungry to that point, well, you know, a big meal is going to fill you up. It's going to take you to satisfaction. But you are guaranteed to get hungry again. That's just the way it works. Same thing goes with spiritual hunger. We always want more. It's big. Now, in itself, this big hunger is neutral. And that leads to a very important point. It can be shaped to serve good ends or bad ones. There is nothing in the desire to seek out intimacy and ultimacy itself that prevents it from being linked to unworthy ends. Racism has its own definition of intimacy and ultimacy, and so does fascism, and so does militarism, and so does sexism, so do all the other kinds of isms, and the ultimate result is that you have someone who murders innocent people for God, instead of being the kind of peace that God really is. Instead of having a Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., you have the Christian terrorist and Planned Parenthood shooter, Robert Louis Deere. We must all very carefully tend to the spiritual hungers we are born with. We don't have a choice in this. They're hardwired in there. Those hungers are just big, and they are in there. And they can be destructive if they are not cultivated carefully and directed to serve the ends of justice and of love. And that is why we exist. That is why Unitarian Universalism exists. We protest against anything that twists people's natural spiritual hungers and makes them serve unworthy ends. We profess religious values and engage people in ways that aim to put all of that spiritual power to good use, to beautiful use. We protest and we profess. And religious exploration is a key part of this. It is a huge part of this, which leads to our own religious education exploration program here at UUCA, and would love to hear some thoughts that you have on our program here.
Our program here. I think that being religious is a transgressive act, affirming the inherent worth of each person in a capitalistic society where each is commoditized is transgressive. Creating spaces where the voices of those who have been traditionally marginalized are heard, where not just the voices of the dominant culture are lifted up. This is transgressive work, transgressive space that we are creating. If we accepted a mainstream stance on everything, then our religious exploration would be a trivial matter, because we could content ourselves with not exploring beyond the everyday messages in any important way. But since we collectively choose to transgress against unjust practices in our world, religious exploration is therefore not a trivial matter. If it were trivial, we could show a movie to our children, roll out a basketball for the youth, and make cooking classes our central offering for adults. Don't get me wrong, I love movies and basketball and cooking, but we are called to the difficult and persistent work of transgression with our religious exploration to teach ourselves and each other non-trivial values at every level. If we really want to get better at social justice work, at anti-racism and anti-oppression and multiculturalism, at saving and savoring the world, worship is a necessary but not sufficient component of that. We also need to find a way to persistently incorporate religious exploration for ourselves and for our children. I really believe that is what is at stake here, that is what we have to get better at. So, how about you, Anthony? What do you think?
Commodification, isn't that a good point? So one of Jay Leno's favorite jokes goes something like this. He says, I went to McDonald's yesterday and said, I'd like some fries. The girl at the counter said, would you like fries with that? So that girl at the counter, she's in my mind's eye, and I'm thinking about how she's sleepwalking through life, isn't she? She's asleep at the wheel. She's numb to the fact that her aliveness, her vitality is slowly ebbing away. She's just like that frog in the kettle. Heat's being turned up, and she just doesn't know that she's disappearing on herself. Another favorite philosopher of mine, in addition to Jay Leno, is John Stuart Mill. And here's what he says. He says in one passage that humans' spiritual hungers, they are a very tender plant, easily killed. And then he goes on to say, people lose their high aspirations as they lose their intellectual tastes because they have not time nor opportunity for indulging them. And then he says, and they addict themselves to inferior pleasures, not because they deliberately prefer them, but because they are either the only ones to which they have access or the only ones which they are capable of enjoying. In other words, would you like fries with that? I am here, and I believe you are here because you don't want to be sleepwalking through life. You don't want that. What you want is a way of life that keeps your high aspirations alive and carves out sufficient space and time for you to build them up, to indulge them, to really go deep in them. What you want, I believe, is a practice and a discipline that empowers you to resist inferior pleasures and to stay on track and to be the full human being that you aspire to be. And our religious exploration program here at UUCA, together with everything else we do, it wants to meet you where you are. It wants to meet you right there in this desire you have for a way of life that's going to take you into your fullness. And that's why we're hopeful today. That's why we're hopeful today.
We are working from a place of hope and optimism. It's where I like to work from. It's when I'm with a small group talking about our hopes, our goals for time together, I'm the one with the big bombastic imagination regarding those goals. People will say, okay, we've got a weekend retreat together. What do we want to get out of this time together? And I will say, I want to elevate the entire world's spiritual consciousness, another level of Fowler's spiritual levels. I'll say, okay, we've got an 8-week adult religious education class together. What are our goals for this? Well, I would like, by the time we conclude, for the United States government to be experimenting with democratic socialism. See if we can get there. You might notice this morning Anthony is wearing a blue shirt and I'm wearing a red shirt because he's a Democrat and I'm a communist. In reality, when it comes right down to it, I know we can only do what we can do. I tend to be less concerned with whether everyone shares my goals, thankfully, than whether we are working effectively towards the ones that we do share. Too often, it seems like our strategies for working together tend just too much towards shaming, panicking, and quitting. The work of spiritual maturity and justice making, these are some of the hardest endeavors in a human lifetime, and yet if we're not careful, what we end up resorting to is shaming ourselves and each other, panicking that the work wasn't done yesterday, and quitting, storming out in a huff because it wasn't done our way. I'm qualified to comment on these processes because I happen to be an expert in all three. But I also know, and I've also found that there are better ways of doing this work, of finding those intersections of our hope in our community, in our time together, and ways to employ them that actually help us to grow in spiritual maturity and in social justice making. We have some plans for kind of ways to experiment with making that happen next year. And I'd love to hear, Anthony, kind of how your hopes tie into that.
Well, I do confess that I have one hope that has to do with Donald Trump. I hope that he stops saying that he has the world's greatest memory, or the world's greatest anything, frankly. On the other hand, here are my more reasonable hopes, the ones that I actually think can happen. Here at UUCA in our religious exploration program, the hope, first of all, to make religious exploration classes and experiences for all ages more widely available. The challenge here is mainly people's crazy busy schedules. Can I get testimony from you guys? Crazy busy, yeah. That is a huge challenge for us. Most people have time only for making one stop in our congregation all week long, one stop. And if we can make worship and religious exploration available in one stop, make it easily available in one stop, we are going to really create a much greater capacity for involvement with people. Thank you. So we can get into, I love that, testify. That's right, good. A second hope, to strengthen children's and youth religious exploration programming, but to do this with a special focus on adults. Let me explain that. Karen Bellavance Grace, the 2013 FOS Fellow for Innovation in Multigenerational Faith Formation, says this. She says that our UUA curricula and religious exploration ministries have been largely created and supported with the goal of helping children and youth grow into Unitarian Universalist adults, rightly so. At the same time, though, she says, we know that an excellent indicator of youth and young adult religiosity is the consistent religious practice of their parents. That's what she says. So to the degree that we develop the consistent religious practice of parents and other adults. To the degree we do that, we will support the religious practice of our children and our youth. They go together. They are not hermetically sealed off. We want to bring them together. Hope number 3, more support for our religious exploration teachers. No more having to miss worship. No more having to choose between teaching and singing in the choir. And that's bringing a smile to Mr. Milton's face. No more showing up to teach at 9:30 only to find out that 1 or 2 students showed up. That's the only folks who showed up. Supporting our religious exploration teachers. Hope number 4, doing better at growing lifelong Unitarian Universalists. Students ages 11 and up attending worship more regularly, which will not only make UUCA a more well-integrated worship community, but it will also help our teenagers to grow spiritually as UUs. In many of our congregations, there's really 2 congregations in one building. It's the children and youth over here, and it's the adults over here, and that's not healthy. We want a better integration there. All of these hopes, there's more hopes to mention. I believe that we are going to make wonderful progress by implementing what I am calling the Supercharged Sunday Initiative. It will start August of 2016. And when it starts, what's going to happen is we are going to make religious exploration classes for all ages more easily available on Sunday morning. You're going to be able to come Sunday morning and worship and go to RE, all ages. Statistics clearly show something. They show that participation in congregational life decreases when people are struggling to make headway in developing and deepening their faith. For this reason, we must provide as many opportunities for faith formation experiences as possible, far beyond what we are doing now, far beyond that. Now, in conversation with lots of folks, I am considering several paradigms for the Supercharged Sunday initiative, which have already, by the way, been implemented in other UU congregations, just a couple, but they're already out there in UU congregations in our nation. One of these paradigms is called middle hour, in which we maintain our 2 services in shortened form and expand the time between them so that religious exploration classes can take place then during that middle hour. Another paradigm is the multiple worship space paradigm, in which we start Sunday morning with a single service in the sanctuary, and simultaneously we are streaming that service to multiple spaces in our building, in our chapel, in rooms 209, 210, in the family room that is in process of being developed, in the social hall, perhaps some other spaces. We'd want each of those spaces to feature a unique worship experience, as in the family room would be boisterous and child-friendly. The chapel would be more focused on quiet and reflection. Following the single service, we would have a 15-minute transition time in which folks can grab some coffee and have a brief chat for folks as they are moving off to their RE classes. RE classes for an hour, and then following that, there'd be more time for coffee and conversation, and that's Sunday morning at UUCA. That's it right there. Now, hearing this, I imagine that the questions out there are teeming. Teeming. Some of you smiling, some of you frowning. Great. It's great. To pull this off, we must manage the logistics very carefully. We're going to need to have lots of conversations. This is not the first time or the last time you'll be hearing about this. We're going to have them. But we want to keep one eye constantly upon the big picture. Our long-range plan, which we created together, it envisions UUCA as becoming among the most engaging and enriching congregations in Atlanta, and an obstacle to this is the fact that some of the ways that we've been doing things for a long time, some of those ways, they are out of sync with our changing times. And we need to get back in sync. We need to get in sync. So we are going to try some things. You know, I wish our Congress would try some things around gun control. And we are going to try some things here at UUCA. For the sake of our mission to change as many lives as possible, we are being experimental. We're going to be bold. We're going to try things. Writer Annie Dillard, she once wrote that at a certain point you say to the woods, to the sea, to the mountains, to the world, now I am ready. Now I will stop and I will be wholly attentive to you. You empty yourself and you wait, listening. That's what she writes. And that is what I hope for, that UUCA is going to be there for as many people as possible when they are ready. When they say to the woods and to the seas and to the mountains and to the world, I am ready. Let's be ready too. Amen.